And and then at the end of the first week of them having the interface in their house so that they can actually interact with the air quality, device and hopefully it turns on, we'll ask them a usability and trust survey. We'll ask that same survey also at the end of the first week of them in the other condition as well. And then we also have at the end of each condition, so the end of, experiencing the manual condition and the end of experiencing the automation condition, we have this usability and trust survey, which is the exact same. So you'll see we're trying to create the same measures at multiple points across time so we can see how people's opinions change over the duration after experiencing our intervention. And then at the end of those sections, we also have a scent survey. We'll talk about what each of these surveys convey, but just to have a good overview of kind of how we're spacing out the survey data collection. And then we've floated the idea of having a post survey at the very end. I think that kind of, it's easy to throw that together, just be another iteration of the same questions, whether we want to actually do that or not, is something that we can still figure out. All right. So let's talk through. So our objectives for the communications team is to really understand how users' perceptions and knowledge about their in-home air quality device changes over time and across conditions. So again, from the first week of experiencing it to the end of having it for 6 weeks, and then again in the manual versus automated condition. We're also interested in how does user interaction with the in-home AQ device change, again, over time and across conditions. So the first one is really getting at the survey questions. The second one is those objective measures of them pressing on the dashboard display. Also, we're guided by what type and quantity of information do users value for informing them about their at-home air quality. So trying to understand where do people seek information, what do they understand, and what is important to them. And then lastly, our guiding question is what factors influence a user's decision to yield control versus choose to override their in-home AQ device. So when are they good with it just taking over control, turning on and off? When do they decide to override? What potential factors influence those decisions? So those are research questions that are guiding this this data collection in the home from the communications team. All right, so let's dive into each of these surveys to get you a good feel for what we're going to be looking for. And please, if something comes up, please interrupt me or throw something in the chat. I have the chat also open. Okay, so the very beginning of the study, when we go into people's houses, we're going to ask them a modified version of the weatherization survey. We're not going to talk about this one in depth because I think as a group we've talked to, quite a bit about this survey. But as a reminder, the intent here is to collect some baseline understandings of what their perceptions about air quality is. Like, do they even understand what it is, how they seek it out, if it matters to them? Understand priorities for in-home maintenance. So how often do they maintain, aspects of their home and how, air quality might play into that. And then any potential risk factors that might relate to why they care about air quality, health hazards, for example, that sort of thing. So we'll collect the same data for the weatherization survey for our in-home participants. But let's get to what is different and unique with this in-home data collection. So first, let's talk about the usability and trust. So we're going to see how people feel the perceived usability and what their trust in our air quality system is. Again, at the end of the first week of experiencing it, the very end of experiencing the condition for 6 weeks, and then repeat it again for the automated versus manual condition. And so this might be a little text heavy, but I'll tell you the key things to look for here. The first is that we utilize validated surveys from the technology acceptance model, the system usability scale, and trust surveys that are, well validated in the field and accepted. And so they should pass through peer review process, and they provide valuable factor loadings for the constructs we're interested in. This survey has three parts to it. The first is getting at, ease of learning the system, ease of actual use of the system, and perceived usefulness. So these are all, getting at the usability aspects. The second part of this survey asks people about their trust in the system, and we're interested in does that trust change over time or does it change between automated versus manual conditions? And the third one is subjective information that we're eliciting that aren't based on validated surveys that are, what do they like? What was painful about the uh, system? And then what do they wish to have if, they could add something to the system? So again, this is a word heavy one, but it's just, maybe more so transparency if you're interested in the ins and outs of surveys. So these are adapted survey questions from those scales we talked about. So basically on I always forget what point Likert scale these are. So these are 7-point Likert scales, right? So it'll be how strongly do you agree or disagree from 1 to 7 on each of these. And so, they would answer all these questions. And we just rephrase them with the context of the air quality system, but the basic sentiment of each of these questions is true to their true survey. And so basically, right, someone would answer, 7, 6, 3, 2, whatever their answers would be. And then for those three under ease of use or ease of learning usage, we would take the average of their score, and that would give us an indicator, household one has a ease of use at time point A of, 4.5, for example. We have ease of actual usage. So again, you take the average of those six, and then perceived usefulness, the average of those 11. You don't sum them up, you do the average so that you can compare, a factor that has three questions versus six versus 11. Nothing too rocket science there. And then the second part of this usability and trust is the trust questionnaire. So this is probably the most established trust questionnaire, at least that I'm familiar with in the literature. And so it gets at different elements of trust, right? So is the system deceptive? Does it behave in a, you know, consistent manner, etc.? And same thing here, we get a single value of how someone feels about trust. Yeah, your question underhanded.
It's just an interesting thing to apply to a system. It's not a word I would use, but people have done it, right? So
Yeah, pi. You put is this that's the true word used in the GM?
That's the exact word used, and I've used it like a
okay.
billion times. So yeah,
Oh,
it's worked.
I'm gonna start using that for my technology. All right, underhanded. Love it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? Could it be because originally these were based out of, you were saying this about a person or an organization or something like that, and then they're now anthropomorphizing in part,
It's
instead of saying Betty is deceptive, you're saying the AQ system. I mean, I would think that's part of the reason that some of these sound a little funky, which is no,
It,
I don't have a
it, it
big
was
problem with.
always technology versus the
Really?
human. Yeah, it's
Well,
it's it was made for computers, I think, in 2000.
yeah.
what did I, famous last words, I would suspect they started looking at trust in other places to get to these. Which again would make sense to do. It'd be stupid for them to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Um, but it is interesting because they do. It's anthropomorphizing the technology, which is also an interesting aspect of things.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. I agreed. Like it probably morphed from trust before early, before we were thinking about trust in computers and how they assess trust in uh humans. Yeah, this study has been cited an insane number of times. I think collectively, maybe excluding Tammy, all of the rest of ours, number of citations combined would still probably not equal how many times this one survey has been cited.
No, I believe that. I think also the oh cripes, and I'm not going to remember. Oh, it's interesting that you don't look at what's behind the AQ system. Like where the data is coming from, some things like that. Again, an interesting aspect of how they're measuring trust or how we are here.
Yeah, and we could definitely add or pull it apart more. I think the idea is to think of the system as a whole, and we in the survey say the AQ system is, both the dashboard and the fan and, everything in your that we've added in your house, right? So they're not trying to parse out what part they like and what they don't like. I see that my hand is now raised. I don't know how to change that.
I won't call on you.
Yeah, I think that might be permanently raised. I don't know how to change that. There we go.
There's the system behaving in an underhanded manner or an overhanded manner.
I like that. Perfect. Yeah, and then the last part of this survey is just open-ended questions that we added to this use case. So, what information did you find useful, not useful, and what did you wish the system had? Just, open-ended opportunity. So our plan for that again is we will yield a measure of ease of learning, ease of use, and perceived usefulness. We also added a couple questions per the pilot testing that the system, was noisy or potentially people would be worried about the energy pull it draws. So we actually have a couple of questions that just ask the noise has negatively affected my home and the system has increased the energy usage of my home to get at what their perception of that is. And again, trying to measure those across time and see if that changes. And these map back, if you remember those 4 research questions we had at the beginning, it maps back to, how users' perceptions, knowledge, and interactions with the device changes over time and across conditions. Yes, Tammy.
So you are asking about the energy use, and then we have an FAQ in our user guide. So on the energy use, should we not have that? Would that affect your the results of the study?
I mean, I think it's important to have it in the FAQ because I think it could be a concern of participants.
So you don't feel like it's gonna affect the answer here?
I mean, it might. I think the benefit of having it in the FAQ is like participant, like, satisfaction, and they could think differently than what we say in our FAQ potentially, but
Sure.
open
I
to,
just didn't want to mess you up.
I hear that for sure. Yeah, I mean, we could remove it if we don't think it's a concern, because it could, but I think we don't want to concern the participants, for just but the potential one survey question.
Okay, that's cool. It's more like would I want to so Kristen just sent out the participant guide for y'all to look at. Just maybe look over it with what you expect the users to know in mind. Or know or not know.
Yeah, that's good. Good insight. All right. So, yeah, that was weatherization, that was the usability and trust, and then the other big one is the sense survey, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we can derive out of the interface metrics last. So this sense survey we're going to do at the end of the 6 weeks of experiencing the manual and the automated conditions respectively. Same survey. Pi came up with this great acronym. It's the System Expertise and Navigation Satisfaction Evaluation Survey, which no one will ever know about except for us. And, that's okay. We need to find joy also in our surveys. So this survey is aiming at understanding the user's basic understanding of the system's functions, their awareness of its functions in their home, how often they override it from their perspective. We can also, challenge that with the objective measure we collect from the interface, their knowledge about the interface's features and functions, and then any feedback that they might have. So this is getting at, do they really understand the information that is being provided on the dashboard? So let's walk through some of what we have here. So we want to know if they understand the system's basic functions, specifically like how does it even work? And so we have this question, which of the following best describes how your system has worked over the past 2 weeks? And, this is the exact same question, whether it's in the automated or manual condition. And hopefully, right, they'll select A if they're in automated and B if they're in manual and not mix up the options. And that gives us a good sense for if they really understand how the system works or if they don't have an accurate mental model of how it operates in their house. Um, yeah. The next ones is understanding their understanding of its functions and their overriding of the fan. So we asked them, how often did you notice the fan turning on and off? And how often they chose to run it, even if there were no air quality events detected, just to get a good feel for that. And we can, again, compare that to the actual observed measures on the dashboard. And then the next ones are to understand about the system's features. And so we have 10 questions where we have a display. So if it's in the automated condition, it's a picture of the automated display, a screenshot. This is static that we will, screenshot once we have the final dashboard display interface design dialed in. And then same thing with the manual. We'll take a screenshot and we'll just populate it in the survey, but the content, of the questions doesn't change. And so they're just true, false, so we can get binary, yes, they got it right, no, they got it wrong, and we can get a score of how well they understand what the dashboard displays to them. Right, so we'll ask questions, like what is the air quality on the dashboard that you see, and some various questions related to just, what the content is and what it means to understand if they even get it. Yeah, someone says, yeah, Paul said, any concerns with people not always being good about right versus left? Yeah, that's a totally fair point, though we didn't think about. And I see that my hand is raised again. I need to clearly stop moving my hand so much when I talk. Yeah. Perhaps this could, yeah, your point is well taken. I think we will definitely revisit these once we have, the final locked in dashboard display and make sure it's unique. We've changed the dashboard display like so small iteratively so many times. I think we just got exhausted of tweaking these questions every couple of weeks. So before we, yeah, do like well noted, I appreciate you all having that keen eye. We will definitely, make sure we do the due diligence to make sure that these questions aren't repeated or don't make sense. But yeah, that's the point. All right. Let's see here. So the second part is so that was the like dash display, the just home screen that you land on. We also want to understand the different interface features. And so we have a bunch of screen grabs of the pop-up menus that come up that are alerting you like, hey, the fan just turned on because there's poor air quality, or hey, we detected poor air quality, we need to turn the fan on, and we ask them some various, again, true false questions related to these pop-ups, which again, waiting for them to be finalized to truly have, what the picture looks like, but to give you a sense of what those sort of questions look like. So again, holistically trying to understand what their perceptions of its functionality capabilities are, and then objectively we will know what a correct and incorrect response is to see if they are interpreting the information correctly. And then lastly, in this sense survey, we're looking at their feedback about the features and the system functions. So these we just created, again, for the use case of this study and not necessarily based on validated surveys, but trying to understand, what their perceptions are. So, I don't think we have to get into the weeds of what this content is, but maybe more just the point is to, demonstrate what we're looking at, and what sort of measures we can collect. Tammy, please.
Yeah, so I think you're trying to understand here if they know how the system works and if they've used it. If I didn't know and I was answering the survey, I would be embarrassed and I would go look at the thing. Is that not a concern for you? Because I would just like be like, oh, not trying to lie, but like, oh, I should know that. I would, um, I I feel bad.
Yeah.
Um, so I would probably cheat.
Yeah, I think that gets also maybe at Marilee's point is maybe we should have an I don't know choice, and then that catches that, and that would of course be scored as a 0 because you don't know is still not understanding. And maybe that could help alleviate that. That's a good point.
Yeah, and like maybe just say it's fine. It's fine if you don't know, just say so.
Yeah, that's good context. Yeah, we got rid of all the context, but I know we don't have that context in, so yeah, note taken there. Cool. Yeah, I appreciate all your guys' feedback. It's super helpful to get kind of someone who hasn't been staring at these survey questions for years perspective on what we missed and what we inferred.
And I'm going to jump into, because I can't figure out how to raise my hand. So maybe between us, we've got hand raising. We could, join together and get it working today. Um, I like the questions you're asking and stuff. I think with the ones that are the 1 through 12 on this screen, um, I think it might be good. I think there are more, for want of a better way to say, are more typical ways to say some of these things. Like it is unclear when the fan is enabled or not. Can we do, like, it's unclear when the fan is on or not. I think if we kind of look at it, and I'm happy to take a look at those and go, well, you might try this other word instead of that word to get something that's a little more typical for for the audience and just for people who aren't well, it'll be easier for them to read. So that's just a suggestion. Kind of, there are a few places I think where they could be a little more straightforward, and they should help with the folks understanding what you're saying. And I'm not saying it's not hard to understand it. I think we could we could increase the readability of them.
I gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that's always a success indicator of a survey. So yeah, we'll definitely send those your way for your good editing. Yeah, sometimes trying to match the language of what they would see in the interface and you lose sight of like how that makes sense in English. Sorry, yeah, Christian.
I can't remember what platform we decided to do the survey on, Qualtrics or Jotform or whatever, but like for some of these, would it be useful to like put the screenshots of these various, like, so like, do we want to put the button? We talk about like, I have access to information tab. Do we want to show what that is? When we're talking about some of these things might be ambiguous. Do we want to show that? Or does that like guide them too much? I don't know, like just a thought. And I don't even know if we do that in service, but
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can add images to individual items, but we can just break it down and like make it into 12 different questions with pictures.
the other question, maybe this is probably a longer discussion because I think it's probably more of a survey theory standpoint type thing, which is probably not what we want to get to right now. This is just more for my curiosity, but like, is there logic to the order we put these questions in from like a fatigue standpoint? Like if we have time, I'd be interested in getting your thoughts there, but I'm guessing there's a lot more to get through before we dive into that type of discussion. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the goal is to keep this as short as possible. And, usually you put the questions you care less about exactly at the end. But also there's like tricks, right? So like we could ask the same question at the end of the survey and at the beginning of the survey, and if people's answers are the same, we're like, okay, they were paying attention. This data has validity. Or like reverse code questions. So if like, they notice all of a sudden their question, like the wording is looking for the opposite 1 to 7 or 7 to 1, and they catch that, right? We can be confident in their responses are like true and accurate. There's tricks to do that, but yeah, I think that's the downfall of having potentially too many questions, and maybe this survey will end up having too many questions, and I think these would be the first that we would cut. Yeah, good point there. All right. Yeah, so again, these are intended to map to the first 3 research questions, which is, how their perceptions, knowledge, interaction changes over time and condition. And then also the new one here is what type and quantity of information do they value when informing them about their at-home AQ. So we tried to get our survey questions to really point towards these. Um, yeah, I think that's what this slide was trying to get at. All right, so then I'm going to shift to talking about what we can get out of the interface, which is not survey related. So I'll just pause if anyone had any last comment or question about the surveys before we pivot to what we're going to get out of the interface touch data.
I have a question that does. I mean, it's probably more about me than it is about the survey. So I know that these are validated and you all look at what other people have done. And so maybe I'm the only one who responds this way. But if I see the same thing twice in a survey, I'm like, you dummy, you already asked me that. And then I start to have like a less good impression of the survey people.
No, I think
So
that's fair. Like, you don't have to ask the same wording, right? You can get at the same
yeah,
sentiment.
for sure, but it's still the same. Like, if you haven't figured that out already, that's my attitude. Right? How come you don't already know that from what I said?
Yeah.
And especially because you're going to be giving the same survey twice. I know you said you took the context out, so you probably have this, but like, just something like we might have already asked you this before. We just want to know, it like to just roll with us or something like that. I don't know if that's necessary for other people. Like I said, it could be just me. This could be just my generally bad attitude toward authority.
Yeah, no, that's good. I just made note, at least in like the second, third, and fourth time we asked the same survey to say, we get that we've asked you these already before. It's good feedback. I'm okay if the participants think that I'm a dummy, I guess, is my takeaway there.
That's it, but I stop
I
answering.
know. Yeah,
Yeah, I have less of a
I get that.
uh
Yeah.
like I'm just thinking about my attitude. I start out being like really, okay, I gotta get this right. I gotta do this right. And then as it goes on, I'm like, oh my God, they're stupider than me. Okay, I'm just gonna I'm just so I start to lose respect. And I don't like I said, that probably doesn't happen to anyone else. It's probably just my own thing. But I just think about the surveys that I deliberately decide not to complete. Right, like I'm like, you've exhausted my patience.
Yeah, I get it. I think it's always a challenge. Hopefully the fact that they get paid based on them completing the survey will
This is
get them to
yeah.
do it.
That's
And we're not
important.
asking them,
Yeah.
questions multiple times within the same survey. It's, 4 weeks apart potentially when their
Yeah,
system
that
is
is true
trained.
too. Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that probably there'll be enough time that's passed that and like you're saying, you may notice this before, we've asked you this before, but we're just curious about how you're feeling now. And so and saying to them, there are no right or wrong answers when it comes to some of these, we'll add that. Erica, it just thought, I had one question about, I'm assuming you want to, have the same person doing the survey. each time,
that
right?
has been a
And
point.
yeah, and I'm wondering about, I mean, in a way, I was kind of like, is it that you want the person, because I don't know the answer to this, so I'll preface it that way, because do you want the person to be thinking about that they are like, you say to them, hey, now think about the experience of your whole household, or is it that you want them to be going specifically just what they think, regardless of what anyone else in their household thinks? I would think maybe telling them one or the other of that would help you to interpret your data better, because then I mean, I could see me reviewing this paper and going, well, how do you know that that the answers you're getting are them thinking of it, just them, or them thinking of the household? So um, that's just something in the instructions maybe to clarify for them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we had those conversations like early on, especially the point like what if their survey says that they never use the interface and then we see that on the click buttons that they use the interface a lot, right? And yeah, we talked about what if we had like a passcode, like a lock code like you have on your phone, and so we can uniquely identify each user, but we don't want the barrier of access, right? We want people to quickly be able to look, and so that's the trade-off that we just have to accept.
I agree with you there. Definitely wouldn't want them to have to put in an access code to do something with it. And I think you could, when you prompt them, of just think about how you've used it, or think about in general how your household has used it with some of these things. That, if I'm a reviewer of that paper, would be like, oh, okay, that was a kind of a good way to address this challenge that you're facing. And to yeah, it's almost like it's too bad. Well, ooh, in an evil land, I could see you would have their fingerprints and you would know which fingerprint it was, and you would trace that back to that user, or something. And maybe you have to have the cat's paw print in case they're the ones accidentally hitting something. But I like us saying, hey, think in this way, and I think that would go far for a reviewer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I always, try to as much as I can do within subject measures to kind of get at some of that potential bias that we might see. So like, household one, the same person answers the survey all 4 times, so we can see how person one, right, has changed through the duration of the study,
Yeah.
and hopefully we get something there.
And I think in a lot of ways, that's probably your cleanest way, because
Mhm.
you're not, we would hope they're fairly accurate in what they can say about themselves. And so that, letting them know, yeah, you're not representing everybody, you're just representing you. I would argue that is your cleanest way to, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So that was the survey. So we have maybe 5 minutes till 50 past. So I think that's plenty of time to talk through this. So the other part of what we're interested in is the data we get from people touching the dashboard. And so so we imagine that data will, right, be like timestamps of what got clicked and what screen they were on and how long, or just, yeah, timestamps of what screen was on, what got clicked, right? And from that information, we can derive metrics that are of interest to us. And so this section is really getting at not what the raw data will look like out of the dashboard, but what we can derive out of those data logs that are timestamps of what gets clicked, and what is being displayed. So let's talk through it. I know this is a lot, but we're going to just try to highlight some of what we are interested in to give you some visibility there. Of what we're looking at here from the communication side. So again, this isn't the actual data that gets extracted out. This is, would be run through our code, and we would get variables that look something like this. And so the first is what we've highlighted in red is, what we'd be interested from the independent variable standpoint, right? So like what week it is. So we know temporally where they're at in the study. We know if they're in the automated versus manual condition. And right, we will be able to, with the timestamp, know what the AQI was at that time point, and whether or not, right, an event is being flagged with our system, right, as a binary yes or no variable. Right, so from that we can know, what, how often they're clicking on it, if it's auto versus manual condition. For example, if it's week 1 versus week 12, right? Maybe they ramp it up or dial it back. So we can really drive understanding the data with these kind of what we call the independent variables in this context. And then another element that we're really interested in is understanding how they interact with the fan. And so we're planning on deriving, and again, the numbers and columns isn't super important, but just to give an idea of what that might look like. We're really interested in understanding like they press the fan button on or off. Right, they like accepted one of the pop-ups that say you need to turn the fan on, and they did it, right? And we know from when that pop-up occurred based on the timestamp to how long it took them to actually press the button, or if they, said, no, I don't want the fan to turn on right now, right? We can get all that information and again, see how that, correlates back to what week it is, what the AQI is, and what the interface condition is. Also interested in the screen status metrics. So, is the interface screen on or off? And so between when, button clicks occur, we can see that it was off for an X number of seconds or hours, how long they turned it on for, and what screens they looked at, so to get a good idea, right? Maybe they never turn it on for the first week. Maybe they turn it on a bunch in the first week and then they never do that again as the study progresses. So understanding how those behaviors might change with the system. And then there are also other tabs on the display. So right, there's the home screen, but there's also the information tab that basically just says, what is air quality, how the system works, so what manual versus what automated condition looks like, and what the fan's function does. And so we can see how often they look at that information tab for how long they spent on it. Maybe in the beginning, they don't understand how the system works at all. And so they look at the information tab a lot. And then at the end, they never look at it. And maybe their survey suggests they understand the functionality, right? These are potential things we could extract. There's also the historical conditions tab, so we can see if they ever access that. If they didn't, what that might look like, how frequently, to start to understand, what information seems to be important or not to the users. And then the last function, I don't think we have necessarily like the feature where they can snooze the fan or like remind later, but if we have something to that capacity, or if it just, the pop-up says you need to turn the fan on and they don't do anything for X number of seconds, right? Like we can collect that data. So those are the sort of variables we're looking to extract out of the log data that really comes from what gets pressed at what time stamp and what the corresponding AQI is and week and interface condition. So this is the last slide, I believe. Again, these interface data are mapping to our research questions. How does user interactions change over time and across conditions? What type of information and quantity of information do they value for informing them? And what factors influence their decision to yield versus choose to override their in-home AQ device? So hopefully that gives y'all a good vision, either confidence or lack of confidence in what we're trying to extract out of the in-home intervention from the communications team side.
That's great. I know we have a meeting next week, but just a note for the three of us to talk about working on some kind of quick processing scripts for like making sure things are working as we're extracting data. I haven't thought at all about the interface. What do we want to be able to kind of process immediately for the QA/QC? But that'd be one good for the three of us to talk about. So just a mental reminder for next week.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's good. Before our meeting next week, you have, this idea of what we're looking for. Yeah. Tammy.
So that kind of leads into my question, which is I don't think that you're going to be processing the data during the test. during the period of the test while the instruments are in people's homes, we're trying to develop or have a little bit of QA just to make sure the instruments are working. But I don't think you're gonna be doing that except to make sure they're working, right?
So we don't need the data in real time. We can do it in real time because we just have a script that we're going to drop it through and get this output. We were planning on doing it in post whenever the data dump comes through.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to check
Yeah,
because we can pay attention to that, but I think you don't need it.
yeah, no need to, yeah, expend memory and power to something that we can do it afterwards.
Thanks.
Any other comments or reactions? It's okay if you are concerned about anything or think something's garbage. Any feedback is valuable. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and big thanks to Pi for putting that slide deck together.
Yeah, this is pretty detailed. I really appreciate it.
That's great.
Thanks, Erika.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. I don't know. Hand it back to you, Tammy.
Okay, well, I don't have anything else either. So have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks.
Good weekend.
Bye.